All right, so today we're diving into something pretty delicious, I think.
Yeah.
Montreal smoked meat. You know, someone sent us this really cool article. It's called Montreal Smoked Meat, What Makes It Special? And it's by this seasoned traveler, like they're in their 70s.
Wow.
So, you know, they've been around. They know a thing or two about good food. And from poutine to pastrami, they really get into it all.
And, you know, speaking of poutine, this traveler actually admits to not being a fan of it.
Yeah.
Which is a bold statement to make, I think.
Definitely.
Considering how iconic poutine is in Quebec.
Yeah.
But it does show that they're not afraid to have their own opinions.
Right.
And that makes me even more intrigued to hear what they have to say about Montreal smoked meat.
Yeah, totally. Instead of just like listing places to try it, they actually like get into the nitty gritty of like what makes this dish so special, how it compares to, you know, other smoked meat traditions.
Right.
They even talk about their first date at Dunn's Famous.
Oh, wow.
But before we get ahead of ourselves, like, let's break down the basics here. What exactly be Montreal smoked meat?
Right.
And, like, what sets it apart?
Okay, well, the article explains that it all starts with beef brisket.
Okay.
Which is cured for about 10 days in a special blend of salt and spices.
10 days?
10 days. And then it's smoked and steamed to achieve that, you know, melt-in-your-mouth texture.
Mm.
But what's really key here is the hand slicing.
Okay.
Apparently that's, like, crucial for maintaining the texture and letting those flavors really shine through.
Interesting. So we've got the slow curing, the smoking, the steaming.
Yes.
Sounds like a real labor of love.
It is.
But let's be honest, what we really care about is the taste, right?
Of course.
And the article paints a pretty vivid picture of that peppery, savory flavor profile.
Yeah.
I'm practically drooling just thinking about it.
And don't forget the fat.
Oh, yeah.
This isn't your one-size-fits-all smoked meat experience. You actually get to choose your fat content.
Wow.
Lean, medium, or fatty for a truly personalized experience.
Okay, now you're talking.
That level of customization, you know, really speaks to the dedication and the attention to detail that goes into this dish.
Yeah, it's not just about the food, it's a whole experience, right?
It is.
And speaking of experience, our travelers' recommendations go beyond just the usual tourist spots. Like they mentioned Dunn's Famous, obviously, in their first date there adds like a really sweet personal touch. But they also get into like the nitty gritty of what makes a place truly authentic.
What I found really fascinating was their lament over the classic smoked meat joints that have sadly closed down.
Yeah.
Places like Ben's, which apparently served like incredible smoked meat and barbecue pork sandwiches.
Oh, no.
Makes you think about how food trends kind of evolve and how important it is to cherish those long-standing traditions while they're still around.
Yeah, it's a reminder that food is more than just sustenance, you know? It is tied to memories, culture, and sometimes heartbreak when those beloved spots disappear.
Absolutely.
But let's move on to something a little more lighthearted, I think. That age-old debate. Montreal smoked meat versus New York pastrami.
Oh, here we go.
What's the article's take on this epic rivalry?
Well, the article dives into the key differences, starting with the cut of meat.
Okay.
Montreal smoked meat uses brisket, which tends to be leaner.
Yeah.
While New York pastrami often uses the fattier navel. So right off the bat, you've got a difference in texture and flavor potential.
So it's a battle of lean versus fatty round one.
Exactly.
What else sets them apart?
The curing process is another major factor.
Okay.
Montreal smoked meat goes the dry cure route, where the meat is rubbed with a blend of salt and spices, intensifying the flavor and creating that signature peppery kick.
Yeah.
New York pastrami, on the other hand, is typically wet cured, submerged in a brine that infuses it with moisture and a different flavor profile.
So it's not just about the meat itself, it's about how it's prepared.
Yeah.
Those subtle nuances that create two distinct culinary experiences.
Yes.
Montreal smoked meat sounds bolder, more in your face with the pepper, while New York pastrami seems to be playing a more mellow, nuanced game.
Exactly. And let's not forget the spices.
Oh, yeah.
Montreal smoked meat leans heavily on black pepper, garlic, coriander, and mustard seed for a robust, savory flavor.
Wow.
New York pastrami, on the other hand, often incorporates sweeter spices like cinnamon and nutmeg.
Interesting.
It's like choosing between a smoky, peppery barbecue rub and a warm, fragrant chai latte.
I like where you're going with this.
Both delicious, but appealing to different palates.
Okay, I'm officially craving both.
Me too.
But before we get lost in a daydream of smoked meat sandwiches, there's one iconic spot we have to discuss.
Okay.
Schwartz's Deli.
Of course.
The article highlights its historical significance going beyond just a place to grab a bite.
Right.
what makes Schwartz's so special?
Well, Schwartz's is practically a Montreal institution.
It is.
It's been around since 1928, which means it's seen like nearly a century of history unfold within its walls. Imagine all the conversations, the celebrations, the everyday moments shared over plates of steaming smoked meat.
It's like stepping back in time, right?
It is.
And you know what? That's where we're going to leave off for. Now join us for part 2 of this deep dive, where we'll explore the cultural impact of Montreal smoked meat and why it's become such a beloved symbol of the city.
Welcome back to our deep dive into Montreal smoked meat.
You know, last time we were talking about the unique qualities of this dish,
Right.
its storied history, and of course, no discussion of Montreal smoked meat is complete without addressing its famous rivalry with New York pastrami.
Here we go again.
You know, it's like Coke versus Pepsi, Lakers versus Celtics. Some rivalries just capture the imagination.
Yeah.
This one's no different. We touched on the key distinctions in part 1, you know, the cuts of meat, the curing methods, the spices.
Yeah.
But let's go a little deeper.
Okay.
What do those differences actually mean for the person taking a bite?
That's a great point. It's not just about technicalities, it's about the overall sensory experience.
Right.
Take the dry curing process for Montreal smoked meat, for example.
Yeah.
That intense rub of salt and spices doesn't just create that bold, peppery flavor. It also impacts the texture. It draws moisture out of the meat, resulting in a slightly crumblier, almost flaky consistency.
So that's why it has that distinct chew to it.
Exactly.
It's not just falling apart in your mouth like a pot roast.
Right.
It's got some fight to it.
It does.
And that intense peppery flavor, I imagine, that really sets the stage for the whole Montreal smoked meat experience.
Absolutely. It's a flavor that's become synonymous with Montreal's culinary identity.
Yeah.
Think about it. You've got this city with a rich history, European influences, a cold climate that calls for hearty, satisfying food.
Yeah.
That peppery punch just fits, you know?
It's like the flavor embodies the spirit of the city itself.
Yeah.
It's bold, it's got character, and it's not afraid to stand out.
Exactly.
Now, how does New York pastrami compare in terms of texture and flavor?
Well, with its wet curing, New York pastrami tends to be juicier.
Okay.
And often has a softer, more melt-in-your-mouth texture.
Okay.
The brine infuses the meat with moisture, creating a different kind of tenderness. And the flavor profile is generally more mellow with those hints of sweetness from the cinnamon and nutmeg.
So it's a bit more subtle.
Yeah.
A bit more refined, perhaps.
Yeah, I think so.
Like Montreal smoked meat is the rugged outdoorsman, while New York pastrami is the sophisticated city dweller.
Okay. Yeah.
They both have their charm.
They do.
But they appeal to different tastes.
That's a great analogy. And it's important to remember that taste is subjective.
Right.
There's no right or wrong answer when it comes to which one you prefer.
Of course.
It's all about finding what speaks to your palate.
Yeah. And let's not forget about the serving style.
Oh, yeah.
Even though both are essentially cured and smoked meats, the way they're presented can influence the whole experience.
Absolutely. Montreal smoked meat is typically piled high on rye bread.
Yeah.
With mustard, no frills, just pure meaty goodness. New York pastrami, on the other hand, might be served on rye or a Kaiser roll, sometimes with mustard, sometimes with Russian dressing, even coleslaw occasionally.
So it's like Montreal is sticking to tradition, keeping it simple, letting the meat speak for itself, while New York is a little more adventurous, willing to experiment with different flavors and textures.
Exactly, and that's what makes the whole debate so fascinating.
You're right.
It's not just about the food itself, it's about the cultural nuances, the regional preferences, the stories that each style tells.
Speaking of stories, our Traveler's article really brought to life the human side of this culinary tradition.
It did.
They talked about those classic smoked meat places that have sadly closed down.
Yeah.
It made me realize that even the most beloved food traditions can be fragile.
It's true. The article mentions Ben's, which apparently had lines down the block for their smoked meat and barbecue pork.
Oh.
And now it's just a memory.
That's sad.
It makes you appreciate those places that have managed to stand the test of time.
Yeah.
Like Schwartz's Deli.
Speaking of Schwartz's, we touched on its history in part 1, but I'd love to delve a little deeper.
Okay.
What is it about this particular deli that's made it such an icon?
Well, for starters, it's been around since 1928.
Right.
It's a place where generations have gathered to share meals.
Yeah.
Celebrate milestones and savor that signature Montreal smoked meat flavor.
I mean, it's practically woven into the fabric of the city's history.
It is.
I've heard people say that going to Montreal and not eating at Schwartz's is like going to Paris and not seeing the Eiffel Tower.
There's definitely that sense of pilgrimage, a feeling that you haven't truly experienced Montreal until you've tasted the smoked meat at Schwartz's.
Yeah.
And it's not just the food itself.
Right.
It's the atmosphere, the history, the sense of tradition that permeates the place.
You can practically feel the echoes of all those past conversations and laughter in the air.
I know, it's amazing.
It's a place where time seems to stand still, where the focus is on simple pleasures and shared experiences. Now, our traveler in the article didn't just focus on Schwartz's.
Right.
They also shared some lesser-known gems.
That's right. They raved about Dunn's. Famous art describing it as the place where they had their first formal date.
Oh, wow.
And, that personal touch really adds another layer to the story.
Definitely.
It reminds us that food is so often intertwined with our personal histories and memories.
Yeah, it's those little details, those glimpses into someone else's life that make these deep dives so much fun.
I agree.
It's not just about learning facts. It's about connecting with the human stories behind the food.
Absolutely. And speaking of human stories, let's shift gears for a moment.
Okay.
And talk about the cultural significance of Montreal smoked meat.
Yeah.
Because this dish goes beyond just being a sandwich.
Right.
It represents a whole community, a heritage, a way of life.
That's a great point. This isn't just about meat and spices.
Right.
It's about the people who brought this tradition to Montreal, the generations who've kept it alive, and the city that's embraced it as part of its identity.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's something we'll explore in more depth in part 3 of our deep dive.
Okay.
We'll delve into the cultural impact of Montreal smoked meat and how it's become such a beloved symbol of the city. Stay tuned.
All right. So welcome back to the final part of our Montreal smoked meat deep dive.
Yeah.
We've explored how, even that great pastrami debate.
Right.
But now let's zoom out a little bit.
Okay.
Consider the so what.
Yeah.
Why does this sandwich matter so much?
Yeah.
What's its cultural significance, especially in a city as diverse as Montreal?
Well, that's where it gets really interesting. Montreal smoked meat isn't just like a tasty lunch.
Right.
It represents a whole community and a history that's often overlooked.
Okay.
The article subtly points this out by mentioning the influx of Eastern European Jewish immigrants in the 19th century.
So those immigrants brought with them the techniques, the flavors, the whole tradition that eventually morphed into what we know as Montreal smoked meat today.
Exactly. It's a reminder that so much of what we consider Canadian cuisine actually has immigrant roots.
Yeah.
And in a city like Montreal, which prides itself on multiculturalism, that's even more significant.
Yeah. I mean, think about it. You've got French influences, Italian, Portuguese, Asian communities all thriving. Yeah. And then this Jewish deli tradition becomes iconic.
It's true.
It speaks to how Montreal embraces different cultures, but then blends them into something uniquely its own.
And that's what makes exploring food so fascinating.
I know. It's amazing.
It's a window into history, sociology, even politics sometimes.
Wow.
This seemingly simple sandwich is actually like a symbol of how a city evolves over time.
Yeah.
Adopting and adapting traditions along the way.
I love that it's not just about the food on the plate, it's about the story it tells.
Exactly.
And speaking of stories, let's revisit that Montreal versus New York rivalry for a moment.
Okay.
We've had some fun comparing them.
Yeah, we have.
But what does this obsession with best say about us as eaters?
That's a good one. I think it speaks to our need to categorize, to rank, to find the ultimate version of everything.
Right.
Food becomes almost like a sport with passionate fans on each side.
It's true. We love to argue about which pizza style is superior, which city has the best tacos. Maybe it's just human nature to seek out the best, even if it's ultimately subjective.
And in a way, isn't that part of the fun?
Yeah.
The debates, the passionate defenses of your favorite foods, the friendly rivalries. Yeah. It adds a layer of enjoyment to the whole experience.
Yeah, as long as we remember it's all in good fun.
Right.
And that ultimately different strokes for different folks.
Exactly.
But back to Montreal smoked meat for our listener who's now an expert on this delicacy.
Yeah.
What's the key takeaway we want them to remember?
I'd say this. Next time you have a Montreal smoked meat sandwich, take a moment to appreciate the layers of history and culture. It's not just a pile of meat on rye. It's a testament to immigrant ingenuity, to a city's evolving identity, to the power of food to connect us to the past.
Beautifully put, and I hope it inspires them to explore other foods.
Yeah.
With that same curiosity looking beyond the surface to understand the stories they tell.
Absolutely. Every dish has a story.
Yeah.
And uncovering those stories is what makes exploring food such a rewarding experience.
Well said, and on that note, we've reached the end of our Montreal smoked meat deep dive. We hope you've enjoyed the journey and learned something new along the way.
Thanks for joining us.
Until next time, happy eating, and may your sandwiches always be piled high with delicious discoveries.